My name is Una Ferguson, and I've been working for approximately 52 years. I think since the time I was 6, I've always been wanting to help, and I sort of went around with the stethoscope and checking my dollies and whatnot, and my parents. And when I first thought about a medical career, I had wanted to be a doctor, and my father, in fact, I wanted to be a psychiatrist, and my father said, "How could you waste your time being a psychiatrist, because after all you'd get married and have kids, and that would be a waste of a career." So I went into psychiatric nursing instead. It's changed dramatically. For one thing, I was actually looking at my pharmacology book from when I trained, and it's a small little book, which now, I mean, you can't keep up with the number of drugs that are coming out. You have to be basically online, and you get it current, daily almost. They're always coming out with new things. We just had a very limited supply of what we could do. Nursing has changed in that doctors used to smoke at the desk, so did nurses. The doctors had a lot more power over nurses than they do now. We weren't really considered a professional in those days. We were sort of the doctor's aides, and we were helpers. And I think that carried through until we actually gained our professional status, which was only in the 80s. 87 is when we actually became a profession. And I can remember when they first considered nursing as a profession, they compared us to bakers because we were both caring. And then, fortunately, they decided that maybe we were more in line with the police force. And they thought that our salary should be sort of on par with what they were getting, because after all, we were in sort of life and death situations, which was a little more realistic than a baker. Not saying that bakers don't have problems, but I think we have more life and death situations. I was a night nurse, and so I would come on. I had a staff of one other PSW on nights with myself for 32 patients. And on the second floor, we had one RPN and a PSW for the other 32. But I was responsible for both floors. When COVID came, we had no change in really staffing, but because of the restraints and the fact that we suddenly had PPE to worry about and whatnot, they had to do a lot about people working in multiple institutions. So what they did was they gave people full-time, and they dropped whatever institution they were working at and only became available for one institution, and they topped their hours to almost full-time. So we did increase a bit in staff, but as the virus kept coming up with more and more problems, we found the staff was being taken off of nights, for instance, and putting on evenings, because the evening staff would suddenly be depleted, or they'd go to days, or they juggle around. So we ended up basically with the same staffing on nights, which it was fine until there was a problem, i.e. Somebody dying, at which point I've had to make a couple of phone calls to management and say, like, I need staff, which fortunately for me, they'd provided. For a lot of long-term care facilities, that wouldn't be the case, because we were very fortunate to have a hospital beside us that we could draw on in an emergency, whereas most long-term care facilities wouldn't have that. For myself, I found I was becoming exhausted, mainly not because of the workload. I don't think that, I mean, it did have a bit to bear on it, but I think it was because the stress at work was starting to increase. I found I was listening a lot more. Staff were coming in with problems, not saying that they never had problems prior to COVID, but suddenly they were dealing with schooling, they were dealing with husbands being home full-time. There were abuse situations where people just haven't lived together that long, 24 hours a day. And the nurses were trying to work from shifts. And You know, you come home, you want to sleep, you've got toddlers running around, or you've got schooling. When the online schooling, a lot of them couldn't send their kids to school. And you know, you have that problem of you spend the time schooling, well then you don't sleep, and then you come in even tireder the next night that you have to work. And I found that as an RN, I found that it was listening to them and being available to hear, because sometimes they weren't getting that at home and they just needed to vent. They're becoming super fatigued. The PSWs are working doubles, like 7 doubles in a row. You can't keep up that type of working and not have it affect your mental health, your physical health. And as a result, a lot of them went off on sick time because they were just fatigued. And I think that is the biggest problem, is you haven't got that backup of staff, and nobody's gotten vacation, so you didn't have that release either. They're wondering now whether they're going to lose their vacation, and that's a problem. A death in long-term care. In our facility, pre-COVID, basically the person dies, we tidy them up, we call the family, the funeral home. The funeral home comes, they pick up the body, and they leave us a rose. In COVID times, we have to get into full PPE. We have to go downstairs because they're not allowed into the building. We have to pick up the stretcher. We have to come back in the building. We have to disinfect the stretcher, bring it up to the floor. We have to body bag the patients, which we've never really had to do prior. Transfer the patient onto the trolley, disinfect everything again, get out of our PPE, put on new PPE, go downstairs, hand them over. So it's just time consuming. As far as care, the patients, especially when they're dying, it's just sad to watch, because they really need that family connection and they don't have it. We were lucky in our facility that we could put the family in full PPE and they could see the patient at the last minutes, but they don't look the same, and they're frightened. And they're frightened of us. I mean, you can imagine going in masks and gowns and visors and whatnot into a patient who's dying, who doesn't really recognize you at the best of times, and you suddenly look like an alien from outer space. It's very disconcerting for them. My personal experience was one man who was dying, and he came back from the hospital supposedly sort of on his way out. Well, he sort of woke up at 3 o'clock and became very, very agitated and very anxious. So I went in and we had to keep him on the bed for one thing, and he was just hysterical because he wanted his mother, and he was 96, so I couldn't provide his mother. So I said to him very nicely, well, your daughter will be in the morning. And because of the masks and his hard of hearing, he sort of screamed at me, in a month, I'm going to be dead then. And I said, no, I said, in the morning. But you had to sort of shout, and you know, you're trying to be pleasant and caring, and you're having to shout, and again you come across as an alien. You know? And I found that really, really difficult, that I wasn't providing the type of care that I wanted to provide when somebody was passing away. Get vaccinated. I think that's the biggest gift we can give everybody, is to get the vaccination when it's available, and try and get this thing under control. We've been through things before. I mean, we went through polio, which was a 5-year thing where I can remember, even as a child, not being allowed in the water and being kept away from people. But we've never had it worldwide where it's affected the economy and affected people's jobs as much. I mean, I'm sure the 1918 pandemic did the exact same thing to the economy, but we didn't know about it worldwide because we didn't have the technology to bring us instant news. But just to stay cool, I praise the healthcare workers, because I mean, they're working as hard as they can, And we've lost sort of the hero status now. The people aren't running out with cookies and telling us how wonderful we are, so now we're just coping. And they really need not to be shunned by society. I think that's the biggest thing. To have workers come in and tell you that they can't get daycare because the daycare won't take them because they're healthcare workers. I mean, that has to stop. Either we provide them with provincial healthcare where they have a special daycare for healthcare workers. They also have to take into consideration schooling. Not everybody can homeschool. And a lot of them are sitting with disabled kids. And that's, again, another trial. Some people just can't give up their jobs. There's lots of single moms. But I think the biggest thing is just to get vaccinated and try and get this thing under control before we lose more and, you know, the economy suffers more and everybody, so we can get some sort of normalcy back. You're doing a good job, and nobody can tell you any different. You know the type of care you give and how important it is, and just to stay strong with the profession, try not to lose heart. I think the other thing that I would be saying to the new nurses too is that not only do they have the education, the tool set, and the ability to manage this pandemic, but they also have a resource center that they can use. And I think whether they go to another nurse, a more experienced nurse, a less experienced nurse, they go to each other. But nursing has its own help system. And I think that's what they have to really use.